welcome, Faithful Politics listeners. I am Will, your political host, and I'm joined by Pastor Josh, your faithful host. And today we are joined by two of the most trustworthy people in the news industry. Julie Mason is the daily host on SiriusXM POTUS channel for almost a decade. She now has a morning show called Julie Mason Mornings, and she has interviewed tons of really popular and unpopular political figures all along the Beltway, and has 30 years of experience covering local, state, and national politics. Olivier Knox is the Washington Post political correspondent and anchor of the Daily 202. He's also the former president of the White House Correspondent Association and has covered 6 presidential campaigns. So he's obviously has a really deep knowledge of the inner workings of Capitol Hill and White House. So thank you guys for being here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. I was telling Julie just a little while ago that her style and her ability to kind of like capture the essence of like journalist and just sort of the world of media is hands down probably one of the best that I've ever mainly listened to since you're on Sirius. But like it's really sort of like changed my viewpoint of how I consume media and how I encourage other people to consume media. So I'll just kind of start off by asking you, Julie, like what got you into the business of journalism and news and what have you?
My mother always wanted to be a journalist, but she was born in the 1920s when those kinds of opportunities weren't there for women. So when I was growing up, she always impressed on me that it would be a good job, a fun way to live, like an exciting life. All my brothers and sisters all went into banking and stuff like that. So I was kind of like the last hope. But it really clicked with me. I never considered doing anything else.
What about you, Olivia? What got you into the world of journalism?
My my second year in graduate school, I was at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, and there was an ad posted. The U.S. correspondent for the French newspaper Le Figaro was hiring an assistant, and he was offering $1,200 a month. And so I'm probably the only person you're ever going to meet who went into print journalism for the money.
And how many years ago? What was that? Was that
96?
What is 12? 96? Oh wow! So $1,200
years ago.
Yes.
I mean,
yes. Can't you tell?
$1,200 in 96 is like probably close to a million today. Yeah.
He paid. I mean, he paid extremely well, and the work wasn't that difficult. And a few months in, I thought to myself, I hadn't picked a vocation, and a few months into it, I thought to myself, I could do this job better than he can. Mm-hmm. Why don't I give this a shot? And I sent out resumes everywhere, and the first people to respond were the good folks at Agence France Presse, which is where I spent my first 15 years.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's pretty cool. Now, I guess maybe the follow-up question is like, why are you guys still in the business?
Oh, I love it. Yeah, I love it. I loved there were some bad years, but for the most part, when I look back on my career covering local politics and then state and national and then going to the White House and then moving to radio, like every step was fascinating and fun and hilarious and adventurous. And it was incredibly stimulating and challenging and heartbreaking and tough, but it's just been great.
Wow. What about you, Olivier? Why do you keep doing the things that you do?
I find it incredibly rewarding on every level. I mean, I find the ability to both develop a level of expertise in something as well as remaining a perpetual student to be really very appealing. And somewhere in there's probably the fact that when I was growing up, I bounced between France and the United States, and when I was in Paris, I had to explain America to my French friends, and when I was in Vermont, I had to explain the world to them. And so, somewhere there's that feeling of like, I think I helped this person understand this thing better. In the case of politics, maybe I helped this voter to understand things a little bit better. I don't care how they end up voting, But if they understand this thing a little bit better, then it's rewarding. I couldn't go into teaching because both my parents were teachers, professors, and I would never have been as good as either of them. So this is sort of like a consolation prize.
I spoke with Adam Klasfeld a few weeks ago from no longer Courthouse News, Law and Crime, and I was asking him pretty much the same question. I asked him, like what is it about journalism that really just kind of keeps you going? And he said something that I'll never forget, where he talked about he was covering a Turkish kind of like fraud case and whatnot, and in Turkey they are they've got like a media blackout, and he was basically just like tweeting and reporting on the story, and he noticed that he was getting a lot of replies back on Twitter that were in Turkish. And so he had to like use Google Translate or whatever, and basically what people were tweeting back to him was like, thank you, we don't know what the heck's going on, and like, you're giving us information that we can't really get here. and he said it basically just kind of like, like gave him the motivation to just keep on reporting. And I'll never forget that, because in my mind, I just think like the work that you guys do is so important. And, it's so sad that, the work you guys do gets vilified by everybody. I'd imagine it's got to be like a teacher, probably, Olivier, like the most thankless job in the world, right? Like you think you're doing something good, but like nobody really likes you, like the people you're writing about, the people that are reading it,
like, so your mom likes you most of the time.
Right. The famous line is, if your mother says she loves you, get a second source. But the no, I mean, I tell myself that no one has ever fired up the comments section to say, well, that was a perfectly adequate story.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I completely agree.
Yeah. Now, when both of you guys got into journalism, you guys got in before kind of the age of the internet. I'm guessing. So like how
smoke in the newsroom. I'm that old.
Oh, really? so how, I mean, like how has it changed over the years? I was looking at some information earlier today just about kind of like the anatomy of the news cycle, and they had a lot of like really great graphs and charts, and it showed, like at the beginning, a story would go to print, person to read it, but then like interest in it would go way down, but kind of with the advent of television media, then social media, stories tend to stay alive a lot longer. So like how has news kind of changed over the years since you guys have been doing it?
Well, it's gotten faster, but I don't think it's gotten better. The rush to turn around stories just, I think, leads to a lot of mistakes. I notice a lot more mistakes. I make more mistakes now because everything is like rush, rush, rush. And I'm not necessarily nostalgic for the good old days when deadline was 9 p.m. and rah, rah, rah. Like, not that, but it's gotten faster. It's gotten more fractured than it used to be. News has less authority, obviously, but I just don't think we're serving people in the way that they need. And you see so much media illiteracy, people just believing any crap that they read online, and people struggle with ideas for how to fix it. These top-down ideas: should there be government regulation? Should Facebook regulate? And no, I just wish there was a way for individual Americans to become just smarter about the news they read. And I feel like the internet and the speeded up news cycle has really aided that. I wonder what Olivier thinks.
Yeah, Olivier, what do you think?
Well, let me start by saying that when I was starting out, print reporters like Julie could swan into the filing center close to deadline time, and I'd been there for 10 hours filing nonstop. I think for me, right? For me, what's funny is everyone's a wire now. Everyone's in everything now, right? Like the Washington Post, where I work now, sends out news alerts that very much resemble what I used to send out when I was at AFP. When I'm in the dinosaur era, but also do digital video, right? And also do podcasts. And that's true of a lot of people. If you go to CNN right now, sure, you'll get video, but there are plenty of pieces that are only print. They're only words, right? Yeah. And so there's been this, in addition to the acceleration, there's been this diversification inside most newsrooms, not all of them, but most newsrooms, where you now there's not just a print aspect, not just a photo aspect, not just a video. You've got a much more blended product. So acceleration, diversification, and then the third trend that I want to highlight, because it's really important to me, is the absolute devastation of local and regional news, which I keep trying to explain to people. Unless you think the largest employer in your county will never, ever, ever, ever do anything bad, unless you think that your mayor or your state legislature will never, ever, 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 ever do anything bad and always has your best interests at heart, unless you believe those things, you want a good local and regional reporting structure. And we are losing that. And at a time when some forces in politics are ignoring the US Congress in favor of going methodically state by state to get their will through state legislatures, it's really bad that we have, there are some state houses where we don't have a reporter anymore. We, meaning the news media. So those are the things that I would probably highlight.
Yeah, totally agree with Olivier on local news. I came up through local news, and it was so important to the community to just cover like every tax increase, all like how they were spending tax money. It's so important, and all the graft and corruption. I mean, it's really overwhelming, and to just lose those eyes and ears on that is just a terrible disservice. But people want their news for free. And that's part of the problem, because of the internet now. People are used to it. They don't want to pay for it. They don't want to pay for a local newspaper subscription, or they don't like their local paper. And so they die. The newspapers die.
Yeah. The first time I ever paid for news was actually when you did almost kind of like one of those like NPR fundraiser type things, but it was compressed in like 20 seconds, and you said something. You gave a similar pitch just like that, and I remember that night thinking, I don't have like $5 to spend a month, like I'm telling myself this, but I did. I ended up subscribing. I won't tell you which publication because I don't want to offend Olivier, but like I did. I went in and subscribed, and then I started to like read that one specifically because I'm like, I'm gonna get my money's worth, I'm gonna read everything. That's $5.
Well, thank you for doing that.
But then, yeah, the $5 turned into like $10 a month because I started to kind of see the value, and for me, like a lot of the bigger news sources like Washington Post and others like have really awesome graphics and just interactivity with some of their like in-depth journalism that I really, really enjoy. And, I agree. I think that, more people should probably pay for their news, but unfortunately today, most people think that all news is fake, so how do you swim in a sea of opinion and thought, when everybody thinks that all news is fake, and it's only true if they agree with it.
There's nothing we can do about that except just keep doing your job and doing a really credible, solid, like the best job you can. You can't go to people's houses and make them read what's true. Like people have a right to be stupid. It's unfortunate. Yeah, I mean, what you say is true. It just is never, the criticism of the news media never ends. Most of it is pretty dumb. But you just keep doing your job for the people who want the information, I guess. If there's a better solution, I'd like to hear
it. Yeah. Can you solve this problem, Olivier?
Well, I want to highlight your last point, right? Which is that what you said is, you started out with by saying people say that all the news is fake. That's not right. Your final point was exactly on the money, that people only believe something is true if it reinforces their beliefs, right? Those are different concepts. The same person who calls Washington Post fake news on Monday, if they see an article they like on Wednesday, will blast it out to all their Facebook friends at the retirement community, and will, I mean, really, who's on Facebook? It's more complicated. It's more complicated than just a blanket mistrust or distrust of news, because they're selective about it. In fact, I made that joke about the comments earlier, but it kind of goes back to that, where you'll see people who are like, this is perfect, lovely and wonderful, and it, I've been right about this for years, or this is horrible and hateful and this is fake news. And I don't really know how you overcome it. Although I will say that in my own little world, I have found that replying to someone by saying like, okay, what questions do you have? Tends to be helpful. And I did that. I did that way back in Waco, Texas, Jules, when we used to go down there with George W. Bush, and I would get, I can't do the accent as well as you do, but it was, the whole like, oh, y'all are just, you're just,
y'all are biased.
I don't believe you.
Y'all
I don't believe you.
Y'all just make it up. I don't take y'all's paper anymore.
That was the line I remember from you. And I would just say like, oh, let's do. Well, where do you get your news? And ask them a couple questions. They'd be like, well, what do you, what do you want to know about? Right. Which of course links out to all the major newspapers.
Major aggregator, yeah.
But so getting them to ask me questions, because a lot of them they don't really have no idea what we do. I'll give you just one. I'll give you one example. I'll give you one example, which is really, it's actually this one's on us. This is our fault. People who think that anonymous sources are unknown to us.
Right. That's such a good.
I was going to ask you about anonymous sources.
So I'm dead serious. I've run into dozens of people who think that the news, was dropped like an orphan in a basket in front of the newsroom, and that that we're just quoting, we're quoting ghosts, that we have no idea who these people are. Right, exactly. That we have no idea who these people are. But that's on us. I think we should be much better about explaining that.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't really know how reporting works, and that's not a slam. I don't really know how veterinarians work. I don't know how doctors work. Honestly, I could never be a mechanic. So, like, yes, walk me through what you do. Same problem with us.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just real fast. This is one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you guys, because I wanted for you guys to kind of help explain to our audience like how the news media works. Because I mean, who better to ask than people who work in the media, versus me asking like my neighbor down the street, who's actually a really fine person, but they don't know that much about like the media. So
yeah,
go ahead, Josh.
No, I mean, like you face the same. I face similar pressures just as like a pastor, if I'm coming up with a sermon or something like that, and people just assume that they could come and just say whatever they wanted to when they got up there, and it would be great. And there's no preparation involved. There's no process involved. And of course, that isn't true. And there's quite a process involved. And what I had a question about about where this idea of fake news in your mind was coming, but I think jumping back on what we just talked about with this process of especially anonymous sources, because I'll notice that I have subscriptions to Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and New York Times, and The Economist right now. I have way too many subscriptions, I think, right now. And my dad has been a Sirius XM subscriber for years. So, this is all good. So maybe we can start, whoever wants to jump in and talk about it. When we talk in an anonymous source, what's the process behind that? What do we need to know, or what you as reporters and as journalists feel like we don't know, the regular public, that we need to know to understand what's happening there?
Well, we know who our sources are, and there's usually a pre-existing relationship. I mean, every time I've quoted someone anonymously, it's been someone I already knew and had worked with a bunch of times, and like knew where they were coming from and was a trusted source. They weren't gonna, and there used to be a lot more rules about anonymous sources. And this has been an evolving art in journalism. It used to be, you never let an anonymous source cast an aspersion on someone else or make an accusation without putting their name behind it. Like, you could never use an anonymous source that way, but that kind of like went away. And usually in my experience, I would always tell my editors who my anonymous sources were. Like, person A, B, C, D was this person, that person, that person. They also have to have faith in your work, but not all reporters do that at all. So there's no hard and fast rules about these things. It's very, very depends on where you work. Olivia, you deal with a lot of anonymous sources. I can't really do that in radio anymore. Like with one of those voice distorters and stuff. But it would be like,
Yeah. Anonymous guest.
Well, let me say, I agree completely that there's been an erosion of what used to be some pretty good guidelines for who could use an anonymous source and when and why. When I started out, I couldn't use any anonymous sources.
Mm-hmm.
And that changed over time. And I didn't have to tell my editor, but I had to be prepared to tell my editor. Like if my editor saw my piece and, came out and said, who is that? Then I would have to be prepared to tell them who it was. But I didn't have to go into their office every time to report, oh, by the way, I'm doing a thing on North Korea. The anonymous sources are the following people. Mm-hmm. I will say that it's supposed to begin with a negotiation. We have different levels of attribution. So on the record is, SiriusXM's Julie Mason. On background could be a SiriusXM employee or someone familiar with Julie Mason's thinking.
Someone familiar with Julie Mason's thinking said.
And there's also off the record where you can inform your reporting, but you can't quote them, or you can't say, but an official told me X because they're off the record. So it's supposed to start with a negotiation. Although with some pre-existing relationships, I know reporters, some sources will say, I'm never talking to you on the record. Just anytime I email you or text you or whatever, it's on background as a senior House Republican aide. But we know who they are. It is true that we used to not allow insults or aspersions and the like from anonymous sources. And then in 2004, the New York Times decided it was okay to quote an anonymous Bush aide saying that John Kerry, quote, looks French. And there was a lot of, it sounds dumb, but there was a fair amount of hand wringing in our profession about what they had just done. So that's and different outlets have different rules. It's kind of a free for all. When I started out, Bloomberg couldn't quote anonymous people, but they could include the content of the quote. No, it was like you're on, you're in the bar with Ari Fleischer and he says, okay, on background, that's former George W. Bush spokesman, on background, blah, blah, blah. And by that point, I could say, blah, 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 a senior Bush aide said. But Bloomberg had to paraphrase and leave out the quotation marks. What I'm trying to get at here is, one, there has been an erosion of the rules. Two, the rules actually are at individual outlets. Three, we know who these people are. And in theory, we're supposed to balance out the value of the information with the cost of making them anonymous. The minute you quote an anonymous official, you are the reporter are shouldering the faith of the readers. It is your name and your reputation now. I am vouching for the fact that this person is above board, exists, et cetera. And so that's a real, that could be, that could be fraught. Because the public doesn't know how this works. So you could be, you expose yourself to charges of, you made that person up or you're lying or whatever.
So was a lot of that, the anonymous sources and what you just mentioned, on background or what have you, like, is that just sort of like just gentleman's handshake? There's no formality to it. It's just, okay, you understand, I understand, like we're thumbs up, we're good to go. It's just like that.
Yeah, but it's mutually assured destruction. If I burned a source, no one's going to talk to me. Like, word gets around, that you outed some source, got them in trouble. Like, people find out, and it can really hurt your reporting. And then they could come back and say, well, you quoted me inaccurately, I'm never going to talk to you again. Or, it can be very touchy, very dicey. That's why it's better to have that pre-existing relationship, to like have worked with them over time, so that there aren't those kind of hurt feelings.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
I forgot one really important dynamic, which is that the federal government wildly overuses anonymity. I know that Donald Trump railed against anonymous sources, but in his White House on a weekly basis, they would do briefings for hundreds of reporters that were conducted on condition that you not name the people involved. There was one incident in which Mark Pottinger, his top advisor on Asia, did a briefing for 100 reporters in the briefing room and probably another 250 reporters on the phone. And Donald Trump didn't like the New York Times coverage, and so he accused the New York Times of making this person up. Said this person doesn't exist. It was quoted as a senior official, right? And every administration I've covered has overused these background briefings. So there's some I can't put a percentage on it, but a reasonably large quantity of the news reporting that you are reading that quotes anonymous senior officials. This is by design. This was not in a parking garage in the dead of night. This was in the State Department briefing room.
No, and it reaches levels of absurdity when you call them and you say, "What time is the event tomorrow?" And they're like, "Well, it's at 3:00, but that's off the record." What does that have to do with it? I'm not quoting you. It's a scheduling matter.
That's hilarious. So they'll actually have officials, and what they say is, "Okay, I'm going to brief you guys on this, but you can't tell anybody that was me that did it." And,
no,
and
say,
Trump had
identify me as a senior administration official.
I have the all-time worst story about that.
Oh.
All time.
Oh, do tell.
So I went on a Dick Cheney trip that took us to Afghanistan and Pakistan. And as we were flying out of Afghanistan, heading for, I believe, Oman to rest for a couple days, the Cheney folks set up a Q&A with the vice president. And they said, "Okay, but this is on background, as a senior official." And we fought we fought for 20 minutes about this. And finally just had to, it was either this or not get to talk to him at all. And like the first words out of his mouth were, "The reason the president sent me to Pakistan."
Kind of outing himself.
And the entire briefing was I, me, my. And so those of us on the plane tried to write around the pronouns, but everyone back in DC just howled with laughter and was like, this is Cheney. Cheney is saying this. So that was a horrible experience, and obviously belongs in a satire of how the press operates.
Yes. Yeah.
That's so funny. Now, I have to ask you not a Trump specific question, but a Trump question in relation to the news cycle. And this question came to me. I was listening to Michael Smirkana today, actually at 9:30 or whenever it was, and they were talking about the Ted Cruz thing going on, and Smirkana had made a comment about, he would really give anything for the story just to be dead within 24 hours. And if Trump were still in office, like the story would be dead because there would just be something that would come up, and then like all eyes would be on what the president just said, and that really kind of got me thinking, did Trump have a significant effect on sort of like the life of a news story? And how does that compare to other administrations?
Go ahead, Olivier.
Yes, he had a very significant impact. At times, it was enormously disadvantageous to him because he was in a perfectly fine news cycle. Democrats were on their heels. He was winning some legislative debate, and he would tweet out something crazy, and all of a sudden we're back on the here comes Mr. Trump again. But yes, he had a pretty big impact, at least at the national level. He had a pretty big impact on what stories got covered and how long they got covered, at least by political reporters, and even there by a subset of political reporters. So yes, I would say he had a pretty sizable impact. It's the president of the United States. He's got the nuclear codes. He has almost unimaginable power over your life. I realize that the tweet might be unserious, but it's not necessarily unimportant. I mean, this is a man who banned transgender Americans from military service in a tweet that was timed because that was the morning that the FBI raided Paul Manafort's house. He did that with a tweet. You can't. I don't think I ever covered the insults. I never thought the insults were all that interesting, but there was some pretty big policy stuff going on North Korea, on Turkey, on the Middle East. U.S. military posture. Brett Personnel, he fired a bunch of people. Yes, he had a lot of control. Yes, there was a lot of dumb tweeting, but in the dumb tweeting, you had to separate the wheat from the chaff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with all that.
When he was tweeting something, so what I heard you say is that he would say something on a tweet and there wouldn't be an official document, and then his staff would have to respond and create something from that?
Yes, they would reverse engineer policy to match his tweets. And if they didn't...
that's really true.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And sometimes there would be no paper. There would be no documentation of it. It would just be like, that's just the policy. And then it would, be studied.
Oh
It happened all the time.
The withdrawal from Syria.
When there's a policy, when there's a new policy, they workshop it to death, and there's it goes it goes around and around, and then it finally is washed out, and it just comes to you in this anodyne nuggets, but it's been worked and worked until it is almost meaningless, and you receive it, and then you have to reverse engineer some meaning into it. But with the Trump administration, it was just crazy all the time like that.
Yeah.
So do you guys have Trump withdrawal as journalists? You're feeling the withdrawal from not having Trump? Oh, okay. Jim is having that.
I don't. One of the things I've been telling people, that it's not. I mean, we've had some colleagues who have openly said that this is a boring time, and my response, and here I get to be all scoldy, Julie. Ready? Our colleagues who call this boring, and I'm just thinking, I'm terribly sorry. We have a global pandemic that's carried off nearly 500,000 Americans. We have tens of millions of Americans without work. We have an accelerating climate crisis. We have tense relations with Iran, which might decide any day now that actually they're going to build a nuclear weapon. If you find this boring, get out of journalism.
Yeah, that's true.
Good point.
I'm sure that goes over well.
Yeah, good point.
Did they thank you for that correction?
It does not. No. Ingrates.
Trump isn't necessarily the only president that's had kind of a love-hate relationship with the media, right? I mean, maybe that's a very sort of shallow statement, but all presidents love good coverage. They all hate.
Kraken. You don't even know what's coming. Olivier and I are so on board with this. Obama was the worst.
Are you Sidney
terrible.
Powell?
He was terrible on press. His I don't know where to begin, Olivier. Where even to begin? He would avoid
from the beginning. Let's hear.
Well, okay. Let's talk about using the Espionage Act to go against reporters and their sources. That was good. Surveilling the Associated Press, their phone records. He got up on the Gmail of a Fox News reporter and the Fox News reporter's parents. He surveilled the Gmail, trying to figure out who his sources were. James Risen from the New York Times refused to reveal Risen from the New York Times refused to reveal his source to the Justice Department and was facing a prison term. He was so close to going to prison by dint of the Obama administration that he was already picking out the books he was going to read while he was in jail. And he had thought that, he told me that, he had his knowledge, he lacked a lot of knowledge about the Civil War. So he'd picked out some very heavy tomes and was taking them into prison with him. And then at the last minute, they backpedaled on that policy and decided not to send the New York Times reporter to prison. And Obama's record on transparency was terrible. His record on FOIA was disaster. He avoided the press for months, but did like interviews with YouTube influencers, and they were like, "What? You got an interview?" It was like a lady with green lipstick and a bathtub full of, Fruit Loops. And not even joking. But when you try to talk about it with Democrats, they're like, well, I'm sorry if he was rude to you, Julie, but he was really an excellent president. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, he tried to throw journalists in jail and he surveilled their email and their phone. But, I guess he was just sort of rude and off-putting. And I will climb down off this perch now and to Olivier, who
that was amazing.
It drives me crazy. And then people are like, well, Obama never did anything bad to the press. And it's like, because you just woke up when Trump was elected and this is all new to you. We've been going through this for years. We used to think Bush was like the last word and horrible, right? But looking back on him, he should be getting awards for transparency. I mean, there were at least like briefings and access. You could ask him questions all day long and, stuff like that. But Obama was bad. Go ahead, Olivier.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't match that kind of righteous rage. I think that was lovely. I will add that one less dramatic than say seizing the phone records of the Associated Press, including in bureaus where the offending reporters hadn't worked for years. In addition to doing things like that, there was one really toxic practice that they had, which was that they would exclude reporters from news events in order to, quote unquote, cover them with their own photographer, their own videographer. They would produce their own content. Mm-hmm. So I know that Democrats love Pete Souza, but his fellow photographers loathed him because he would actively lobby to have photographers shut out of events so that he had the only photo.
Wow.
They did stuff.
Propaganda because then he would photograph Obama in these majestic poses that were beautiful, but it wasn't news. It was not news.
I did notice that he always looked so good.
Yeah.
Maybe he had the same photographer Xi Jinping had.
Well, but that was a real problem. That was a recurring fight between the White House Correspondents Association board and the press office there. Had to do with this constant production of in-house propaganda. And I will, by the way, I want to underline this again. Yes, he shunned reporters and did an interview with a YouTube influencer, Glozell, who was best known for wearing green lipstick and bathing in a bathtub of milk and I think it was either Lucky Charms or Fruit Loops.
And I think at that time he'd gone some months without a presser.
And then he'd been shunning the press for a while, and he did Between Two Ferns, right? The comedy show with Zach Galifianakis. And I wrote about it at the time because it was an effort to push Obamacare. Right. And I wasn't fussed by it. I know that presidents have to go to where their audience is. I get it. But what got under my skin was in the briefing room, reporters were sort of poking and prodding at Jay Carney and saying, when's he going to do a news interview? And Carney said, well, he just did an interview. He did Between Two Ferns. And so you can still find this. You can still find my my rage piece about this, in which I said, rage. Yeah, it's like Obama's Between Two Ferns wasn't an interview, or if you do that and search for my name, because and I went in at some length and said, look, it's a lot of things, right? It was really funny. Mm-hmm. It was a very clever play for a digital audience to get them to sign up for Obamacare. It was unusual. One thing it was not is an interview, unless you're White House Press Secretary Jay Carney. But the in-house products were a real thing. And in 2016, Hillary was doing a podcast where she was being interviewed by like a different staff member every week. And they bragged about that being the number one podcast in the country and pretended that it was a news product. And the barriers to entry are so low, like any politician can do this, right? I'm not going to talk to reporters, but I'm going to put out a YouTube video. I'm not going to talk to reporters. I won't take any questions, but my official photographer has this lovely photo of me,
free to use.
Oh, yeah. Wow. It's almost like, say what you will about Trump, but I always found Trump as like he was at least really accessible, and seemed as if, I mean, he would talk to any reporter, like whether it was a good week or a bad week. And I don't know if that's just a byproduct of him just thinking, even bad coverage is good coverage, kind of from his art of the deal, mentality. But he always just seemed like he made himself available even when people are like, no, he should not be in front of a camera right now,
Yeah, he did. And reporters really loved the access because you could just figure out like everything that was going on in his mind, what he was plotting, who he was mad at, what his mood was, everything was like all just out there. And, readers and listeners would say, well, if all he does is lie and make stuff up, then what is the value? But there is value in observing how they lie and make stuff up. Like there is value. I had a White House press secretary on my show the other day, and I asked her 2 questions, and she just spoke and spoke, but didn't answer either one. And that in itself was of value. It made me realize they don't know when the vaccine is going to be available, and they don't know, like, I don't know, some other thing, when we're going to be out of this. It's like, they don't know. And that was, the answer was embedded in the non-answer. So, on its surface,
Right.
not a very useful interview, but I learned some things. And that's the same with Trump. Like when he's lying, that's instructive too.
Well, and also he's the president. So it's like, you can't not cover the president regardless of what he's. Yeah. I mean, is that safe to say? Like, because I think you said it once on your show, Julie. You said that reporters' jobs aren't supposed to be activists. Like you're supposed to get the news, and like whether or not you like the person or not, and what that person, like if Trump just punched an old lady crossing the street, like you're not going to punish him by not covering that, right?
Right. And I think there was a story in the Washington Post recently by Paul Farhi about like smackdown journalism, and how that in this time of Trump, certain anchors really got into the habit of inviting people on the show to create a confrontation. And they would just, you're lying. Well, I'm shutting this down. And it became like very performance journalism, and no one learned anything. It had nothing to do with delivering information or even communication or even journalism. It was performance. It was kabuki. It was ridiculous, but it became really popular. And now that's what listeners want. I'll have like Ron Johnson on my show, and they're like, well, why didn't you? And it's like, well, because I'm not here representing the DNC. Like, I had him on because I wanted to know his thinking, because he's clearly at least half crazy. So let's find out what he's thinking. But I didn't invite him on. Plus, we're supposed to be more C-Spanish than CNN. But there's no value added to that. It's like partisan tickles, and that's it.
C-Spanish.
Yeah, like
I had a question about fake.
Shirley, right? Who's such a great anchor on C-SPAN, and he comes off like this mortician, and he doesn't change expression. He's just like, Well, him in real life. He's so fun, and he's like a lively, fun guy. He's got this great Irish personality, funny. And you're like, different guy.
It's like when someone texts and they're like so totally different on text. They're like really bubbly on text, then you meet them in real life, and you're like, you have no personality. And then on text, you're like the funnest person I've ever seen in my life, but like reversed.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the pinnacle of fake news. I feel like, because I would watch these press conferences for Trump. My favorite one, when you mentioned like having like in-house products, is I mean, I'm sure you guys saw it. The one where he and maybe he did this more than once, but it's the only one I saw, where he put up like this, like, it was some kind of thing that was thrown together. It had to be in like 5 minutes or 10 minutes before. And it was just a bunch of pictures and videos. He's like, I'm not going to answer any questions. You guys just watch this. And it was like some ridiculous, I'll have to find it. It was like the stupidest slideshow thing. And I'm like, he was hilarious, but he was many things. I thought he was funny sometimes. He also was a president. He shouldn't have said some of the things he did, or many of the things. But when he would just say, oh yeah, that's fake news or this and that, I felt like that was like this pinnacle of like this animosity of the conservative right towards this liberal left. media, liberal, like left media, right? I put it in quotes because I understand that that's not the case necessarily. But so I'm like an ultra, like I'm a pretty staunch conservative in many ways, but I'd watch this and I'd see this, and it was just like he would just like rail on this, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on like what was that like, and then how has that evolution happened from this sense of like when did it become through your experience like the media's left and they're fake, like when did that, how did that start, how did that evolve, how did we get where we are?
It's always been there since I've been in journalism. Trump in attacking the press was, it was very clear. He was undermining the messenger. So when we reported something that he didn't like, he could just say, well, it's fake. They just made it up. And he just put that idea in so many people's heads. He really, but he didn't start it. It goes way back, and the animosity, especially between the right and the news media, has been there for so long. But I have to say, I've had just as many problems with Democratic politicians as well. Nobody likes the press. Nobody loves being held accountable. And also we're obnoxious and we're pushy and we chew gum and we don't sit like a lady, and it's, and it puts them like on their guard. But they, but at the same time, like, you think of Olivier is a creature of Capitol Hill as well, and they need reporters, and they'll bust an old lady's kneecaps getting to a journalist, and so they need us as well. But yeah, sometimes it's hard to navigate all that, but I just tune it down. I don't even care about it. Olivier isn't it the same? It's just don't read the comments. You just have to tune out like the hate. I've muted so many people on Twitter. It's a wonder I follow anyone anymore.
I'll start by, I want the record to reflect that I do sit like a lady. Noted. No, I think so. The answer to your question is Nixon. Nixon's the first one who takes this to like the next level, and ushers in the modern era of presidents, particularly Republican ones, sometimes actively campaigning against the media. There was a bumper sticker in the George H.W. Bush campaign, "Annoy the media, reelect Bush." But I think that the general consensus is that Richard Nixon is where we get this as not merely a mild, recurring adversarial relationship, but an actual loathing for the news media as part of your political ideology. I said a version of this in my White House Correspondents' Dinner speech, but I don't give Trump a pass on this. It was different. He did unleash a very different kind of national loathing for the press, one that resulted in a torrent of abuse, mostly targeting women journalists, in ways that I'd never seen before. I had never received death threats prior to the Trump era. I did in the Trump era. So I don't give him a pass on this at all. And I don't think that you can ignore it at all, because this was a really different thing. You can look at the people at his rallies who are wearing rope tree journalist some assembly required t-shirts, and maybe you can dismiss that, but the tone from the top fundamentally changed the way one of the major parties interacts with journalists. This is the first time in my career that I had to tell my son, if you see a package on the stoop, just leave it.
Wow.
Because that sounds hyperbolic, but remember that guy who sent all those pipe bombs to Democrats and to media personalities? I had one person send me 5 single-spaced 6-page typewritten letters from LA telling me that I was wrong, that Trump supporters were obsessive. And that's the kind of thing you can kind of shrug off. But I did have to refer a few people. There were a few people that I had to refer up the chain to actual security folks in New York. And that's fundamentally different. Again, what I said in my speech was I've been physically pushed by press aides from both parties. I've been called names by press aides from both parties. Enemies of the people changed all of that. And while I feel a certain amount of French pride in the fact that Robespierre, the French revolutionary figure, is the first person to say enemies of the people, It fundamentally changed the way these people react. There's such a difference for me between fake news and enemies of the people. Such a gap there. One is attacking our trustworthiness. One is attacking our trustworthiness and our legitimacy to even exist. And I thought that was just very, very different.
Wow. Now,
but don't
how
read
do
the
you?
comment.
Oh, don't read the comments. Got it. Check.
Yeah.
Now, what what advice would you give to news consumers? To become better. Well, want to become better news consumers, because there is a lot of different stuff out there. And I remember we spoke to a lady, Katya Vogt. She works for IRAX International, and she does all these media literacy trainings and whatnot. And the majority of her work was in Ukraine. So like her job was to try to get the Ukrainian population to become very media literate, and in the background, obviously all the stuff going on there. And I remember her saying, that bad news travels faster than like good news, or gossipy news travels faster than truth, and I don't know how much different that is there as it is here. So like what advice would you give to someone that says, okay, I really want to be a responsible media consumer? Like how would that person do that?
Well, you'd have to start with a varied media diet. Don't just get your news from one source. Don't get it off Facebook or social media even, but go directly to the source of news. And there are trusted sources of news. If someone is coming at that question from I want really good, reliable news, but newspapers like the Washington Post and the New York Times are too liberal. Like, I don't know where to go with that. Those are some of the papers doing the greatest news reporting in America. But as Olivier would say, you also have to go local, and you have to support local news as well. So, a diverse media diet is a really, really good start. Olivier, what would you add to that?
I have two things I tell people when I do career day at my kids' school. I ask the kids, raise your hand if you have a friend who exaggerates a lot. And usually they all put up their hands, right? And then I say, okay, well, my exaggerating friend is the federal government. and
That's great.
and I'm your exaggerating friend. So it's fine and it's appropriate to be skeptical, to read skeptically, not dismissively, but read skeptically. I would never in a million years hold it against someone for saying like, I understand this is important, but it's all anonymous. I get it. I totally get it. So I would say read, it's fine to see us as that friend of yours who is entertaining. Sometimes you get the sense that the story is not quite how it actually happened. But so read skeptically. I don't want you to buy what we're selling hook, line, and sinker. It's healthy to look at something because, for one thing, it's the first draft of history, right? Stories evolve. They're not always
That's
right from the get-go. That's the first one. The second thing I would say is, if you can, try to be more skeptical of information that reinforces your beliefs than information that challenges your beliefs.
That's good.
Because too many people mash the retweet button because it's something that they agree with. Oh my God, Ted Cruz said something about he would do X only when Texas froze over. Well, no, that's not true.
So and it did freeze over.
Right. But that was the point, that the fake tweet was meant to get him in trouble because of that. So be more skeptical of stuff that reinforces your views than stuff that challenges your views. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself in a whole heap of trouble.
Yeah. Now, just one last question I have, and it's more process based. Like you mentioned the White House Correspondents Association. Can you explain what that is and what they do?
Sure. So it is an elected board of 9 members, and basically the job of the board is to negotiate with the White House on behalf of the men and women who cover the president and the presidency. When an American president makes a public statement on a tarmac in Japan, that didn't just happen, right? You got to see it or read about it because there were people, there were members of the press traveling with the president. They had their equipment. They had the electricity needed to power the equipment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the WHCA makes a couple of different arguments to any White House. One is we want to see and hear the president at work as often as possible. We want as many opportunities to ask the president questions as possible. And beyond the principled transparency argument, there's the logistical argument. One of them, this is a bit of an outlier, but when the president of the United States makes an unannounced trip to Iraq or Afghanistan, the WHCA has been working with them for a while to make sure that the people who are going on that trip will be reasonably safe, will have the right equipment, the right support on the ground, and the ability to file their video piece, audio piece, print piece, photo piece, or what have you. So it is on the one hand committed to pressuring the presidency to be transparent, and committed to making sure that the men and women who cover the president and the presidency will have the opportunities and the ability to do their jobs.
Wow. And my last question for you, Julie, and I think Josh had one more question is why do you hate millennials so much?
Because like for me, like I'm gonna like that in my life, like what I'm thinking, I'm just like obsessed. All right, you guys. So and they like run the culture.
All right, Josh.
Josh, your blood
I'm not sure. Mine's a little too serious to come off that one.
Close to the bone, or
no? I was just going to say, what is it that? So the whole reason Will and I are doing this, and we're on very different political ends of the spectrum, and yet we're both Christians, so we share this kind of value set, and yet we both have, pretty diverse opinions when it comes to politics. What's your hope for kind of the future for the next 4 years, next 8 years, whatever it is? What's your hope for just our country when it comes to media, or and maybe if you didn't want to focus on media, that's fine. But what's your hope as we move forward, and what are you optimistic about?
Well, I would certainly hope that we could get back to a place where we agree on the same set of facts, but disagree about what the solutions are and how to get where we want to go. That seems like a really important goal to have, because now I just feel like we're operating from just completely different sets of like reality. And I think that's just terrible for this country. I don't know how to fix it, but I think that would be really important. I mean, all this unity talk and all that, I don't know. That's something politicians say. I think there need to be real reforms in our political system. Starting with how we vote and gerrymandering and money in politics and some sort of incentive to get more people to participate in voting, especially in the primaries, so we don't get these extremes from both parties and end up with these governments that don't do anything, and all they do is fight and try to own each other, and like it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous state of affairs. So my hope would really be that we could move away from that. Maybe it's a silly hope, but I just think we'd be so much better off as a country.
I hope to executive produce a TV show called And Another Thing with Julie Mason. The scope of that question is so broad and so difficult. Let me zero in on one thing. I would like for some incredibly creative, imaginative expert in finance to come up with a reliable, long-term way to make local and regional news viable. There are a lot of experiments. There are a lot of experiments out there, and I read. I was born in Vermont. I read 7 Days Vermont. I read Vermont Digger. These are two sites that are doing inventive work, and they do it with inventive funding, and they tell some really important stories. If you're interested, start with Kate O'Neill's series on the opioid crisis in Vermont in 7 Days Vermont. It'll blow your mind. And I would like for someone to come up with, again, a viable blueprint for keeping local and regional news viable. I just, you've seen some experiments, Salt Lake Tribune going nonprofit, right? The LA Times. Mm-hmm. Texas Tribune is a great example. It's a great example of a great state local outlet. The Nevada Indie, run by John Ralston. So there's some inventive stuff going on out there, but it would make, I think, just a huge impact for the good if in the next 4 to 8 years someone says, wait, we've been going about this all wrong, and suddenly comes up with a way of frankly resuscitating
Mm-hmm.
and bringing back to full health a local and regional media ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, well, I can't thank you both enough for spending some time with Josh and I. This has been extremely educational, and your guys' combined experience, I think, is going to be a great value for our listeners. So thank you so much. And I'll continue to be listening to you, Julie Mason, in the mornings, and Olivier, I'll be reading your daily 202.
Yeah, I read it yesterday. I plan to read it today.
Great. Thanks so much for the invite. It was a fun conversation.
Yeah, no problem, guys. And you guys be well. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks very much.
All right. Thank you.